Hello, beautiful people. As always, welcome back. Child support. Child support, a tool that can be used effectively for those who actually need it, because there are exceptions in society where some people need to be placed in child support. But for the most part, this tool called child support is misused. It's misused by those running to put it to use, and it's misused by those with the body of the public law that we went over on Patreon, and a short preview of it was put on YouTube with Child Support Why and How, whereby it was basically created for grants. Secretary of Labor, the Executive Department, which Secretary of Labor branches out of, and all those entities, even they use it wrong. But let's more so focus on the people, because believe it or not, no matter how many people cry and whine about the system, the issue always ultimately goes back to the people themselves. Because one, there are many different types of systems. When people go about the system, there are different types of system. There's a system of capitalism, there's a system of socialism, there's a system of fascism, so on and so forth. And each and every one of those systems are perfect for what they were created for, their intended purposes. Whenever someone came up with that during a certain cycle within a given society, that was the answer to the issue. So now when you hear people speak about the system, well, what system? Which system? And how? The how is the fact that there's an end of the extreme to each system. Capitalism, you have something synonymous with plutocracy, whereby just a few takes all the wealth and many people suffer. But in truth, the good part about capitalism is there's a mindset that the world has an abundance in it, and because of that abundance, you deserve to be wealthy. And there's no reason why everyone else should not have that state of mind. But when taken to the end of the extreme, someone gets gullible and screws others over. Socialism is, well, everyone ought to be good, evenly, no matter what social political class. So you take from Bob and you give him to Mary, right? Ridiculous part to that, which by the way, when you speak about child support, that's socialism. In case you didn't know, mixed with a hint of other types of systems, which we won't go too deep on. But nonetheless, there's nothing wrong with these systems. Again, there's nothing wrong with these systems. It's just when the extreme end of the polarity expresses itself more frequently, and the only way it could do so and perpetuate itself is if the people who suffer against that given quote system do not even know anything about it, yet they're quick to blame the system. What type of system? Why and how? So the focus at the end of the day, no matter what, always fetters itself back to the people. Because if the people gets it, the people will have no need to complain. If the people know the power they will have no need to point fingers, because the system is created and ran by people. Even if the system is created by a small amount of people, the large amount of people are still required to oil their will of that system. Child support is one of the aspects of, quote, the system that many people whine and cry about. Many people loosely hereby Title 4D this. Okay, all right, Title 4D, but how and why? On the Patreon page, we're going over the details of that slowly but surely, and the intricacies that a lot of people overlook. But here's something for YouTube. Think about this for a moment and sit back. That Title 4D is strictly for grant purposes by way of the Executive Department of Government. There's executive, legislative, judicial, right? Okay, well, the executive is the one that mainly has their hands in all this. If you look at the subsidiaries of all these entities, the administrative agencies, and the vague ones that Title 4D of Social Security Act make reference to. And you begin to do your research with the quasi-public and then the actual private entities, from the quasi-court cases to all the other private contracts that they make with people and all the other people that act as subcontractors, that act as debt collectors. All that comes from the executive department. Only a very few exceptions don't, even when there's a cloud of appearance of judicial power. And all of that was created for the purpose of grant. When you, the one on the other hand, who is getting your butt kicked under the guise of that law, if you don't comprehend what's really going on, how can you, quote, free yourself from, quote, the system? Blessing versus Freestone, 520 U.S. 329, 1997. Case number 95-1441, decided April 21st, 1997. Respondents, 5 Arizona mothers whose children are eligible for state child support services under Title 4D of Social Security Act, filed this 42 USC 1983 suit. Oh, there we go. Against petitioner. Look, there's nothing wrong with 42 USC 1983, but if you don't know how it's done, the presumption and the predominant factor is it's not meant for you. But nonetheless, a group of women came together and said, you know what? There's this thing called the Title 4D. We're entitled to get funding from the state because, well, our children need support, right? Child welfare, the good stuff. The director of the state child support agency claiming, among other things, that they properly applied, meaning they now sued the one that's in charge in the public of the child support agency, which is the director, because, well, they claim that they properly applied for child support services, that despite their good faith effort to cooperate, the agency never took adequate steps to obtain child support payments for them, meaning now they want to invoke a trust relationship that, you know what, go get this money for me. Based on what? Well, based on Title 4D. Whenever you try to get someone to do something for you through a form of application, one way or the other, believe or not, there's a trust relationship whereby you are the beneficiary and they are the trustee. But guess what? When it comes to trustee, beneficiary, trust protector, all that capacity, there has to be something that's going to compel performance. What is the incentive? What is the liability? What is the value? In this case, they're just saying, well, we're entitled to do it. We filled out a form, so you owe us. You didn't do it? Well, we're going to sue you. That's what's going on. The agency they're claiming that the agency never took adequate steps to obtain child support payments for them. That these omissions were largely attributable to staff shortages and other structural defects in the state's program. So now they're blaming the state's program and how someone else engaged in private administration of their entity. This Title 4D was not created for these mothers or any man or woman. Again, this Title 4D of Social Security Act was never created for these women or any man or woman to benefit from. In summary, it's just a program that was created under their algorithm for the purpose of siphoning money and another form of quantitative easing and fractional banking. It's that simple. And in order for it to not look like what it actually is, they created a body of law that's tethered to the presumption that they're there to take care of children. Simple. It's not that complex. It's a simple equation. See, many people who deal with child support or speak about the system this, system that, the issue is that people don't get things on an emotional level. You have to get things on an emotional level, outside of just the mere logical intellect. The reason why some people know certain things but don't do better, meaning we've all been in a situation like this before, whereby you know something for a fact, yet in the heat of that moment as it's going on, it skipped your mind. It wasn't until after the fact that you go, you know what, I knew better, yet somehow I allowed it to occur. I knew better. I was aware of a certain level of information. And in fact, as it was going on, I was aware of this information, yet it took place to the detriment of whoever was aware of that information. You know the reason why that occurs frequently, no matter how minute it is, whether it's just some relationship with your neighbor, some relationship with your parents, some relationship with your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, at work, or society at large when it comes to intricacies like this, aka the system people speak of, and child support being one of those aspects of this system. You know the reason why that occurred, the reason why you know something exists and is not right, yet you can't do better, or you fail to do better, and you keep blaming yourself for it over and over again. The reason is because you never got it on an emotional level. Logic is one thing, emotion is another thing. When you get something on an emotional level, those emotional impulses will come up and be automated during that circumstance because you can feel without thinking. That's true. You can feel without even thinking at all. Meaning feelings are far more stronger than the process of logic. Process of logic requires deductive reasoning to stop, think, compare information. Emotional reason, on the other hand, does not require any of that. Emotional reason is what causes you to go into fight or flight. Did you know that? Emotional reason is what grants you the ability to, quote, feel energy. Did you know that? Emotional reasoning is what allows you to be able to act on your feet because you've registered the information on an emotional level, which does not require the forefront of the conscious mind to try to figure out or slowly lag behind. So when you get information, any given information, getting it on a logical level is one. You must get it on an emotional level because the emotional level is what embosses it into your mind. That emotional aspect is in fact the subconscious mind because it's feminine in nature. It's embossed into your essence so much so that it becomes your second nature. Habit is second to nature. Just like nature, habits are repetitive. Just like nature, habits are cyclical. When you get things on an emotional level, it becomes a habit. When you get information about how a system works and why it works, not merely that the what exists, which is that the system is bad, child support is used to separate family. Okay, that's rudimentary stuff. That's child's play. Get past that. Get it on a level whereby it becomes second nature. Whereby the why and how becomes a habit for you. Only then would you be able to put the information to use. These people came into this equation and this res judicata thinking that this thing called the Social Security Act confers some type of allegiance to them by the director and the representatives of those designated within the title of the act itself. Every time any agency are quick to want to do something to the detriment of someone because you applied for it, it's not because they care about you. You are the least relevant factor when it comes to administrative proceedings. The primary factor is the nature of the business and the regularly conducted activity of that business, which is to generate revenue. It's a very simple equation. Don't just know that on a logical level. Know that with an emotional intelligence so that it can be embossed into your mind. Use emotions properly. Don't let emotions use you. Emotion is a tool you must use. It's there for a reason, just like anything else. Emotion is an attribute that allows you to store information. Once you see emotion for what it really is, you will not downplay it, you will not ignore it, and you will not capitalize on it to say someone is weak or someone is bad. You will put it to use properly. Use that tool called emotion to store information on a level whereby things become second nature. It becomes habitual. It becomes synonymous with nature. This is just one example of the many mistakes people make. Thinking some agency, administrative agencies owes them something. When it comes to constitutional things, that's another equation. But when it comes to administrative, you need to think twice, because those are private entities. And if you do want to interface with them, and you're not coming in through your own proper trust, and you're not bringing in property dispute, then obviously something has yet to click. Figure that out first. The rest of the Carta goes on to say that, and that these systematic failures violated their individual rights under Title 4D to have all mandated services delivered in substantial compliance with the title and its implementing regulations. They requested broad relief, including the declaratory judgment the Arizona program's operation violates Title 4D provisions, creating rights and them that are enforceable through subsection 1983 action, civil rights, civil conspiracy under color of law, and an injunction requiring the director to achieve substantial compliance with Title 4D throughout all programmatic operations. Then now they're saying the way you're supposed to be running this agency is supposed to be based on what we want. Are you sure? This res judicata lays it out flat to you that this thing called Title 40 of the Social Security Act, that these agencies who basically want to make money with it use as an excuse to separate people's lives, family. Man, I've seen situations where a millionaire, young, beautiful woman, a life destroyed just through child support. This is some real serious stuff that occurs. People's lives actually get destroyed with things of this nature. So now, because someone is saying, here's a colorable guise of something lawful and we're going to take advantage of you with it, now you wanted to say, okay, here, I'm going to use that same colorable stuff against you. You better know the stuff that truly holds them liable and how you ought to be coming in. That thing called standing capacity is very real. That's the reason why we went over the principles of parents betrayed. Basic stuff. It's all about property, interest, and trust relationship. The district court granted summary judgment for petitioner, but the Ninth Circuit reversed, without distinguishing amongst the numerous provisions in the complex Title 40 program or the many rights those provisions might have created. The latter court held that respondents had an enforceable individual rights to have the state achieve substantial compliance, quote, with the Title 4D. It also disagreed with the district court's conclusion that Congress had foreclosed private Title 40 enforcement actions by authorizing the Secretary of Health and Human Services, which we go over the details of this on Patreon, to audit and cut off funds to state whose programs do not substantially comply with Title 40 program. In other words, they're letting you know that they are in fact private. The latter court held that respondents had an enforceable individual right to have the state achieve substantial compliance with Title 4D. It also disagreed with district court's conclusion that Congress, which is the one who passed the public law before it statutized, had foreclosed, meaning they closed any aspect of anything as a form of default against any party. In this case, the parties acting as trustees for the purpose of grant within Title 4. It also disagreed with the district court's conclusion that Congress had foreclosed private Title 4D enforcement, meaning private contracts, arising out of presumption that it's for the benefit of the child. These court res judicatas, judge-made law that everyone likes to lick its balls, are telling you word for word that there is a private right of action as intended by the Congress when it comes to Title 40 of the Social Security Act, and it has not been foreclosed because they disagree that the private right of action was foreclosed. In other words, it has not been foreclosed, meaning it still exists, and the parties to it still can enforce private Title 4D actions. by authorizing the Secretary of Health and Human Services, aka the Secretary as used in Title 40, to audit and cut off funds deal with monies. So now you're saying, well, you owe me something, you owe us something because, well, the act says this, so you were supposed to do this. Well, the funds were not meant to be going to you in the first instance. Did you know that? If you don't realize that in the first place, this applies on all ends. If someone put you on child support, these are the things you ought to be put into consideration. The funds were not meant to go to any of the parents in the first instance. And they can enforce it through private contract if they want. To audit and to cut off funds to states whose programs do not substantially comply with Title 4D requirements, meaning now the state contracts on a federal level in order to get the grants, under the presumption that they are taking care of your children, whether you're the one who went to them to say, hey, I want to apply for child support, or someone did that against you as either the mother or the father. To make it simpler, outside of all this legalese, they tell you, the court held Title 4D does not give individuals a federal right to force a state agency to substantially comply with Title 4D. Title 4D does not give individuals a federal right, aka 42 USC 1983, civil conspiracy, the provision of right under color of law. The call held that Title 4D does not give individual a federal right to force a state agency to substantially comply with Title 4D. Why? Because it is a private act. Title 4D is not something that individuals can use as a source of right to compel the contracting agencies to that federal Title 4D to perform. Why? Because it is a private enforcement. It is a private enforcement. It is a private contract within the state agencies and a federal level. Federal level being the executive department and subsidiaries that branches out of it for child support. A plaintiff seeking 1983 redress must assert the violation of a federal right, which we've run over in the past. In order for this 1983 suit to be sufficient, you have to feder it to the Bill of Rights. And Title 40 does not afford you a right of action because it is a private right for those who are parties to it. Are you a party to it? Are you a signatory to Title 4D? Nope. You can't invoke private right through it. But what are you a party to? The Constitution and the Bill of Rights. It even tells you in Amendment 9 and Amendment 10, the rights are reserved to you. You have the power. Ever seen that cartoon? The guy just puts up the phallic symbol and he says, I have the power. That's you. You have it. But if you don't know where your power lies, how can you claim it or put it to use? Rather than chase after a bunch of candy. Looks sweet. But have you ever seen some candy that looks colorful, but once you put it in your mouth, it just tastes horrible? And even if it tastes good, once you put it in your body, do you know what it's doing to your system? It's not benefiting you. It's going to turn into some form of illness. And that illness, your children and the future generations are usually the one that suffered for it. A plaintiff seeking 1983 redress must assert the violation of a federal right, not merely of federal law, aka Title 4D. Three principal factors determine whether a statutory provision creates a privately enforceable right. Meaning now you're trying to take the stuff that they're using to administer themselves and you're trying to say, hey, I'm going to claim it. And I'm going to claim a trust relationship. They're saying, okay, you want to do that? Or, okay, well, listen to this. There are three factors that must be put into determination. First, whether the plaintiff is an intended beneficiary of the statute. First, whether the plaintiff is an intended beneficiary of the statute. You see, when I speak about trust and property right, because in order for a trust to be created, a property has to be held for the benefit of the beneficiary. Without a res or a rem or a property, a trust cannot exist. So now they are themselves telling you that there is a trust relationship. Are you meant to be a beneficiary to that statute that you're claiming? Ask yourself that. Secondly, whether the plaintiff asserted interests are not so vague and amorous as to be beyond the competence of the judiciary to enforce. Meaning, do you know the scope of what's going on? Let's just say you are somehow able to prove that you're a beneficiary to the matter, which, by the way, you actually can't. You can't. But let's just say you figured this out, right? Now, do you actually know the scope of what's going on and how it applies to you if you somehow claim to be a beneficiary? It's like being a beneficiary to a trust, and you're saying, all right, I'm a beneficiary and I was listed in the trust instrument, so now give me everything the trust owns. Because the ones that are meant to act as the regulator of that trust is the judiciary. And they're saying, well, another thing we put into consideration is whether you have asserted interests that are not vague or amorous beyond the competence of the judiciary. And as far as we're aware of, this is the scope and limitations of what this trust, aka in this case Title 40, is founded upon. So now if you're saying you're coming in as a beneficiary, and let's just say magically somehow we accept that, you're right, you are a beneficiary. Can you still state certain claims upon which relief can be granted, or are you just living in your own little delusional world? And 3, whether the statute imposes a binding obligation on the state. What does the trust instrument say? Because the trust instrument is what determines the obligation of parties of the trust itself. It's a very simple equation that ought not to be complicated. Even if a plaintiff demonstrates such a right, however, there is only a rebuttable presumption that it is enforceable under subsection 983. Meaning now that, let's just say all these threes have been proven by you, what medium are you going to bring it forth to enforce? They're telling you it's definitely not 42 USC 1983. And that's based on presumption, and predominantly it is rebuttable, it is refutable. It remains that anyone who wants to bring a Title 4D claim by way of 1983 is presumed to be automatically rebutted, because that's not the intent of 1983. Henceforth, dismissal is proper if Congress specifically foreclosed a 1983 remedy. They barred it. Meaning whenever Congress was creating that public act that was statutized into the Social Security Act, specifically Title 40 of that act, unless they mention the fact that 42 USC 1983 is meant to be part of the remedy to enforce it in case it's violated, then it's automatically foreclosed as a remedy. Hence, there's a rebuttable presumption that there's an enforceability of 42 USC 1983 as it relates to Title 40 of Social Security Act. Meaning, in other words, to keep it simple in layman terms, this 42 USC 1983, a lot of people swing on. It's not where it's at, especially when it comes to administration of trust. They slap them with the rest of the Carter that entertains that fact. It either expressly, by forbidding recourse to 1983, it forbids recourse to 1983 in the statute itself, or impliedly by creating a comprehensive enforcement scheme that is incompatible with individuals' 1983 enforcement. Meaning within that Title 4D, it already has its own remedy, and that remedy is incompatible with 1983. And let me tell you this right now, there are parts of the Social Security Act you will never find on the internet. You will have to get a reader's card to go to the Library of Congress to get that. And that part that lets you know that it's incompatible specifically lets you know that no one else can bring in any claim but the administrative agencies it was designed to make money for. But to not prolong this, here's another jewel. There's a lot of jewel in this case law. Here are some of the highlights. And we'll end with this. It says the statutory substantial compliance requirement, meaning now there are standards to how these entities can be compelled against this Title 40 for those who are saying that they owe you a performance to go basically tax someone else. And if you're being taxed by them and they're using Title 40, you should know this requirement because therein lies one of your remedies. The statutory substantial compliance requirement does not give rise to individual rights. So tell me, if someone is coming after you based on child support, who is really coming after you and who is really benefiting from it? Is it that woman and that child of yours? Or is it administrative agencies in and of themselves? FUBU, for us by us. Why? Because the statutory substantial compliance requirement, in order for them to comply with this thing that they're saying they're using as a form of welfare within the quote system that's digging into your pocket through a form of taxation called Title 4D child welfare, there's a requirement on a substantial level that they have to comply with. And that requirement of compliance does not give right to individual rights. So whenever that woman or man applies for child support against someone else, there's another interest that's being put into consideration, whereas yours is overshadowed completely, and your interests and your rights are an irrelevant factor to the matter, because you are not a third or fourth or fifth or sixth or seventh or 10th or 100th party to that trust of theirs. You are no party at all in any way. And what you're simply doing is, when you fill out the application, they're going to ask you for your social security number, or that child's social security number, or the other party's social security number. Or they're going to ask you about the algorithm of the eOscar credit system. They're not going to ask you for the credit score, but they will ask you for the algorithm of that, which we go over on Patreon page. And that is what allows them to take that same application and do fungible instruments with it. Again, the statutory substantial compliance requirement does not give rise to individual rights. It was not intended to benefit individual children and custodial parents. The statutory substantial compliance requirement of Title 40 does not give rise to individual rights. It was not intended to benefit individual children and custodial parents, whether that be you the mother or you the father or the aunt, the cousin, the nephew, or the foster parents. It was not meant to benefit them. Whoever's the child is in their custody, it's not meant to benefit them, but it's simply a yardstick for the secretary to measure the system-wide performance of state's Title 4D program, allowing her to increase the frequency of audit and to reduce the state's federal grant upon a finding of substantial non-compliance. If this is not clear enough at this point, I don't know what else is. Until next time, take care. Best of luck. Hey, beautiful people. I'm inviting you to come join my Patreon page. We speak about everything we don't speak of here on YouTube. On the Patreon page, we speak of establishing privacy in many different means, how to hold tortfeasors liable, the different types of discharge, and the steps to actually do it. Now I'll be showing my own proof of the success. The intricacies involved in why and how it works, and the things no one else would tell you because they've never discharged themselves. The intricacies of settlements, suing people, and many other basic things like other tools that you can use privately, things of spiritual nature, because this goes beyond what you observe with your five senses. And if you just want to limit your remedy to just what you observe with your five senses, think again, because the other side is not playing in that realm. It's not an even playing field. Other things like study tools are shown, things regarding trust and asset protection, and how to lay your trust properly the way people seek it, and the advantage of how to do it. banking, the functionality of how they function, and the validity of it that a lot of people misuse or are misled by, where they think, oh, these other guys are bad, so now I have to just go into argument mode. No, you don't always have to argue. The law is perfected for your benefit if you're competent about it. Many things regarding child support, different examples of settlement checks, and the videos on it, the different aspect of how you can broaden your mind internationally beyond the little chicken scraps that people are picking up when it comes to passport and things of that nature, how banking work, how property protection work, the details of copyright, tort, privacy, different types of trust, the intricacies, and exactly why and how they are done, the intricacies that people from other part of the world know about trust that you don't. Just because you read something on social media and whatnot doesn't mean you really got it. The intricacies of how to use certain jurisdiction and the stuff everyone speaks of. More in child support, more in trust, more in court, more in spiritual nature of things, etc., etc. The fact that tax avoidance is different from tax evasion. The importance of things in commerce and how to actually function in commerce. How to actually really do things as a natural person is beyond speculation. But let me give you this caveat. If you're looking for a cookie cutter or some quick fast food way, this is not it for you. Either here on YouTube or on Patreon. But if you're serious about your education and the function and application of it, rather than the mere accumulation of information, then come on over on Patreon. There are things we speak about over there that are universally and exponentially beneficial compared to that of the ones we speak of on YouTube. And more importantly, the practicality and the actual use of it. Take care. Best of luck.